What's up everybody, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports, and today we're going to be doing an install on this Falcon Sport shock system for the 15 to 18 F150s. What we've got here basically is a front strut setup that's adjustable so you can set where you want to level it, as well as some new rear shocks with the roof shields, and of course all the hardware and everything we need to do the install. So we're going to go ahead, throw everything in our blue truck, take it down to the shop and get started. With all four wheels off the truck, we start out on the front suspension with removing the axle nut, dust cover, along with the nut. Up at the side of the knuckle, remove the 3 brake line bracket bolts. Follow the wire harness up around the shock tower and remove it from the plastic retaining clips that hold it to the frame. On the other side of the knuckle, undo the tie rod from the knuckle. A hammer might be needed to tap it out of place. Behind the knuckle, the sway bar can be disconnected from the end link. We now loosen the upper control arm at the frame on each side, but only just enough to take the tension out of the control arm. This makes it easier to remove it at the knuckle. The 3 shock tower bolts can be loosened, but leave one loosely threaded on to hold the coilover for now. Both lower bolts can be taken out of the lower control arm mount. Then we can remove the upper control arm at the knuckle. Swing the knuckle aside and remove the last top nut at the shock tower to remove the coilover from the truck. For the new Falcon shocks, you must transfer over your stock spring and top hat. Compress the stock spring with a spring compressor, then the top nut can be removed to take off the top hat and separate the coil from the shock. Choose your desired ride height on the bottom collar of the new Falcon shock, then install the new lower spring perch, isolator, and new bump stop. The Falcon shock can install to the spring, then reattach the mount to the top of the coilover. Be sure that the upper hat and lower mount on the new shock line up in the same location as factory. Marking the top hat will help with this. Now that the new coilover is assembled, insert it back into the shock tower and attach the upper nut loosely to hold on the top of the coilover. Pick up the lower control arm to the lower shock mount and thread in the 2 bolts. When they're tightened up completely, attach the locking nuts to the other end. Now the 3 upper nuts can be tightened down. Swing the knuckle back to the center with the axle completely seated in the knuckle, then attach the upper control arm. With a small 1/4 inch ratchet, tighten down the axle nut and replace the dust cover. Next, the outer tie rod can be inserted into the knuckle and tightened down, followed by the upper control arm at the knuckle and frame connections. The brake line brackets are next to reattach to the knuckle and frame. Then move on to the sway bar at the end link to finish up the front end. Working around to the back, we need to first remove the self-tapper bolt that holds the brake line bracket to the axle below the block. Slide in the new bump stop plate around the block and line up the holes to replace the brake line bracket. On the opposite side of the new plate, use the stock self-tapper to thread holes on the other side, then back it out and install the supplied bolt from Falcon. Reinstall the self-tapper on the original side. Take out the factory bump stop by removing the center bolt. Install the Falcon bump stop extension in its place with the new bushing. Just a bit of grease might help you to press in the new bump stop. Now remove your rear shocks at the top and bottom mount to remove it. The The new shocks require the roof shields to be attached by 3 small bolts at the base of the new shock. Install the shock to the lower mount with the lower stock hardware. To then get it into the upper mount, we used a bottle jack to separate the leaf pack from the frame. Once the bolt holes lined up, we installed the hardware and released the jack. Tighten both the upper and lower mounts and replace your wheels and tires to complete the install.
So let's talk about how these Falcons perform on the road. Essentially, we've been driving the truck around back and forth, hauling parts and stuff in Phoenix and just using it for day-to-day use. And then now we're actually on our way through northern Arizona to spend a couple days out here doing some off-road testing as well. But this is basically giving us a good opportunity to run this thing on the highway, run it around town, parking lots, things like that, hitting some, good pavement, bad pavement, everything you'd expect. But I will say I think they feel really good on the road. It definitely is a lot better than some of the cheaper entry-level suspensions that we've ran before, and certainly a lot better than a Spacer Puck would feel on the street. So it's going to be a little bit stiffer than factory, obviously, and I think most of you guys getting into a suspension system like that are probably already prepared for that change in ride, but it by no means is so rigid that it rattles your teeth out or anything like that. It's just a little bit stiffer, and that comes with the territory of adding a little bit of lift to a vehicle. It seems like on rougher roads and over speed bumps and things like that, it seems to soak up the bumps pretty nicely. It's not super jarring, and it doesn't feel like anything's going to break when you hit it. You don't have to slow down to 4 miles an hour to get over stuff. You can carry a little bit of speed without having to cringe too much, and it does feel very controlled and planted. The truck isn't super wallowy either, and that can be a big benefit too, because sometimes if you go all out with suspension, wheels, and tires, and you've got a totally different setup, sometimes you lose some of that on-road stability, but these feel plenty planted on this truck. I'd say comparatively speaking, on-road, the Falcons feel pretty similar to the Bilstein suspension systems that we've ran on these trucks previously, and we've been really happy with a lot of Bilstein's offerings. These are also very comfortable, so for those of you guys who may have ran something similar, that may give you a point of reference, but they're definitely a good on-road performer, and it doesn't feel like it's compromising anything really too badly with the way the truck drives. I think that's enough about on-road performance though. Obviously, if you're looking at these Falcons, you're probably more interested in what they're gonna do for you off-road, so let's go ahead, get these in the dirt, and see what we can find out. So we're in our 2018 F150 right now, and we're running the Falcon Sport suspension, which is basically their front strut setup as well as a rear shock. And we're just kind of cruising through the forest outside of Williams here in the snow and getting a sense for how this performs with kind of muddy terrain, rutted areas. The snow we're pushing through is actually fairly deep, and there's been a couple spots where we've been able to get back in, and there's untouched white fields of snow that we're able to plow through, which is really cool. But overall, it feels like it's performing well so far. Now, the way we've got the Falcon set up at the moment is essentially the max height setting, but there is technically one tick above that if you have a heavier front end on your truck. And by that, I mean running a steel bumper with a winch or something that's gonna put extra strain on the front suspension. But we don't have any other accessories. The front of this truck is pretty factory overall, so we have it at the max setting for a regular truck like this, and it seems to perform really well even being set up that high. And we wanted the clearance for the 33-inch mud terrains that we've got on here, but sometimes there's concern that when you set these suspensions higher up, they ride worse and worse as you go, and you're kind of compromising either looks or clearance for actual comfort and performance. But with the Falcons, it doesn't seem to be the case. They seem to still perform really nicely, even being set high enough to clear the tires that we have.
Yeah, we're running a 33 1250, and even off-road with articulation, we haven't rubbed at all.
Yeah, when you were driving into that creek and kind of bouncing through some boulders and areas, we were going lock to lock in some of the turns and things, and there was not a single area where it was actually catching or binding up, and it felt like the truck stayed pretty well planted.
Yeah, we've been talking, I think we're both willing to compare these to at least the 6112s from Bilstein, and maybe even better than that.
Yeah, for sure. And those of you guys who have kept up with this truck as we've built it earlier know that we did really like the 6112s that we had on here, and we've generally been pretty big fans of Bilstein's suspension, but both on and off-road, these Falcons seem to be very, very comparable.
And it's nice that we're comparing them on the same truck with the same tire.
Yeah.
Because that's always hard.
Yeah, for this truck, it's a really direct comparison, and I think both suspension options are a pretty good fit for this. Here's a cattle guard. And even there, actually, that cattle guard kind of came up without us seeing it because there's a snowbank in front of it, but it is enough that you can just let the truck carry through, and I don't think any of us really got super jarred by that. No. So overall, we were really pleased with how these Falcons performed on our F-150, and honestly, some of the guys around here were a little bit hesitant and kind of concerned that they might not hold up just because Falcon is a little bit new to the F-150 game and not everybody was familiar with the Jeep background that they'd had, but really that turned out to be unfounded. They performed excellent. We didn't even have to worry about them breaking while we were out there. Now, for those of you guys wondering what the negatives or the cons are to a kit like this, there are a few. One of the big ones being price. These are pretty expensive compared to some of the other options that are very similar in the market, so it may not be the best option if you're looking for the most affordable kit. With that, the other con would be that there is a limitation in the rear suspension and that you could probably only add about an inch of lift to the back without causing problems with those rear shocks. They're not designed for more than an inch. So if you're trying to put a larger block or an add-a-leaf or something in there, you would need a different rear shock setup to allow that. Now, in our purposes, obviously we didn't go that high in the rear end and the stance is really nice, but for those of you that are maybe towing or hauling a lot and want that rake back and have the rear end sitting up in the air, then that may be a concern for you. But with all that out of the way, if you're looking for a good system that's going to perform well off-road and ride decent on the street with a nice stance for your truck, the Falcons are a viable option. And if you want to head down the description below, we'll have a link there for you so you can check that out on our website. Also, while you're down there, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our other videos and reviews that we're cranking out on a weekly basis, and I will see you guys next time.